it was stigmatized. It was different times, and I think we've come a long way from that. But she felt ashamed. I know that she did. She felt very ashamed.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. And welcome to episode 143. I have a little PSA to give to other NPEs that are in their search currently looking for family members through various DNA testing sites. If you've listened before, you may have heard people come on and suggest that you take screenshots of anyone that shows up as one of your DNA matches. This is a good idea to do because at any time, someone can deactivate their account or make it private, and then you will lose their information. This means you will lose their name and how they are related to you and how many centimorgans they are related to you. And this just happened to me. I didn't really notice it, but I went in to see if I ever got a response. I believe it was on Ancestry, to see if I got a response from a family member that showed up as a first cousin, and I'd never seen her before. And it was a name that started with an M. And so I did not screenshot it. I just messaged her and I said, "Oh, I wonder how we are related. I see you're on my paternal side. I would love to reach out to you. I'd love to connect with you." So when I went back in to see if she responded, it was gone. The match was gone and I could not remember her name. So I must have scared her to some effect when I reached out to her. And I certainly didn't want anything from her. None of us do. I did just want to see how we were related. But apparently, I'm guessing either her mother or father would be my aunt or uncle. And I haven't ever met any of my aunts and uncles on my paternal side. And I've never met my biological father. So I'm guessing it has something to do with that side of the family. Just a quick PSA. Take some screenshots of your matches in case they deactivate their accounts. But this is the NPE Stories podcast, and so we listen to NPEs share their story. And today I have an NPE on, and today I am speaking with Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Lily.
Thank you for doing this on a Friday night with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate what you're doing.
So what we normally do is get a little bit of a background and start with the family of origin, and I normally let people take it from there. So would you like to start with a little bit of background history of your family?
Yes, sure. My story starts in a small town in northeast Arkansas. The town that I live in is roughly 15,000 people whenever I was born. My mother is the youngest of three. Her mother and father are all from this area and their families were from the surrounding areas where I'm from. So they didn't travel too far to be to where I grew up. My mother's father, my maternal grandfather, was a World War II prisoner of war. He was kind of a hard man, kind of a difficult man on occasion, but I know that he cared for his children and he cared for my mother, and he just, as sometimes happens with um, people of that generation, they're just a little bit tougher on their kids, and I think that my mother was probably on the tail end of that because she was kind of a surprise to them. But my grandfather was a hardworking man. After he got out of the war, after the war was over, he finally made it home after 3.5 years in a prison camp. He was, I guess, ready to have the end of his army career, and just decided that he was just going to come back home to where he was. So he met my grandmother not long after coming back, and they started a family not long after that. He was a tractor mechanic. That's what he did by trade, and he did that until he retired when he was in his 60s. But my mother, like I said, was the youngest. She was um, a surprise to them, but they worked hard. They were hard workers. They worked out in the fields. They had a farm that they took care of, and so they all worked pretty hard. But when my mother was, I believe, in junior high, they moved to the town that we currently live in now. They were in a little bit more of a rural area, so they kind of moved to a town that had a few more people and jobs, and so that's what they did when my mother was in junior high. After she graduated, she went to work in a factory here in town that actually came from Michigan in the late 60s. So there was a lot of people from Michigan that moved with the factory. So she knew a lot of these people that had come from Michigan. She ran around with them. She was really good friends with them. She actually met a person I'll call R, at a company function. Really, it was a company Christmas party. He was from Michigan, and he had mutual friends with people that had moved from Michigan to our town with the factory. So that's how my mother met him, was through mutual friends at the factory that she worked at. He met my mother at this Christmas party, and didn't really go anywhere. But it was a few months later, my mother made a trip up to Michigan with a friend, and she ran into him again. And so when she come back, she discovered that she was pregnant, and wasn't really sure what to do. This was not a good time to be a single mother in the South, and pregnant. It just wasn't talked about. You know, when she gave birth to me, the nurse come in the room and brought all of her paperwork. Actually, it wasn't the nurse. It was a nun, because it was a Catholic hospital, and she brought her the paperwork, and inside the paperwork was the information you fill out for the birth announcement that goes into the newspaper. And the nun took that out and said, "You probably don't want this, do you?" And my mother was like, "No, I don't. I guess I don't want it." Because you just didn't put things like that in the newspaper. Oh, this person had a child out of wedlock. It didn't have there wasn't a man there to also go with the woman's name to congratulate having, on the birth of their child. And so it was stigmatized. It was different times. And I think, you know, um, we've come a long way from that, but she felt ashamed. I know that she did. She felt very ashamed. And I feel like my grandparents, specifically my grandfather, he was not happy. He was not happy with her at all. And unfortunately, that's just how it was. So I was something that was kind of meant to be a secret. R went back to, R was living up in Michigan, so my mother, didn't really have any contact with him on a regular basis. But when she was trying to make a decision as to what to do, whether or not she wanted to let him know about me, or whether or not she wanted to just raise me without him, she decided that it was just easier for her if she just dealt with me herself. She didn't want to, she didn't want to invade his space. She didn't want to bother him. She doesn't, and still to this day, doesn't want to bother people. And that's an example of her not wanting to really bother anybody. But one of her friends took it upon themselves, one of her coworkers took it upon themselves to send him a letter. And he did get a letter that was confirmed later. He received a letter and it was actually quite cleverly addressed to him from me as an infant. It was literally saying, "Hi, I'm your daughter." um, but he never responded. He knew how to get a hold of her, but he chose not to. And my mother just chose to not contact him. She just decided that she would just take care of it herself. So when I was born, I came home with my mother to my grandparents' house, which is where I lived until I was 10. Growing up with my grandparents in the house that my grandparents lived in was, my grandfather was a stern, hard person, but I felt like sometimes I just didn't care. Like I was going to hug him and tell him I loved him regardless of whether or not he wanted me to. You know, I really, really adored my grandfather. Um, he was just someone that I wanted his approval so bad, so bad. And, being like when I first started school, kindergarten, I had a class, there was probably 20 of us in my class, and there was another 20 kids in another class. So there was just like 40 of us there on campus and maybe even less than that. I knew everybody that was there, and I didn't know anybody else like me. When I started school, I started noticing that other people had dads. Why didn't I have a dad? That's weird. Like, why? I don't understand what's going on here. Like, I live with my grandparents, and that's really cool, and I like that. It was a nice place to live. It was a middle class house, 3 bedrooms and a basement. It was a nice house, but all these other houses have dads in them. I don't get it. I probably was, I don't know, 8 or 9 the first time I asked my mother about who my father was. And she didn't want to talk about it with me. She just said his name is R, and that's it. And he lives in Michigan, and that's literally all I know about him. And I would say, okay, and then I could tell that it was an uncomfortable situation. It was an awkward conversation. And I get now why it was because she literally only knew those things about him. You know, there wasn't really connections going on back and forth there to really, there wasn't a Facebook. There wasn't any kind of means of doing any kind of searching on what kind of person he was. So that's all she told me was his name and where he was from. Over the years, I would ask about him, but that's about as deep as I could get from her. And what I didn't realize then was that was literally all she knew was his name and where he was from. Um, my my grandfather served as my father figure. My mother did not get married. She never married. She's still not married today. She dated here and there, but I didn't have like a stepdad or somebody that I called dad. I had my grandfather, and he was highly influential on me. He was very protective of me. I see that now, uh, looking back at, you know, he didn't want me to go to this person's house to stay the night because they had these kind of dogs, or he didn't want me like doing this. He didn't want me to get a skateboard. He didn't want me to play softball. He didn't want me to do all these things that I could possibly get hurt. And looking back now, it was just him being, I guess, just really protective of me. Growing up in that house, my mother had a brother and a sister that were older than her. Like I said, she's the youngest, and they didn't live too far from our area. When I was younger, I do remember growing up with my two cousins. I had two first cousins, and that was it. Which is kind of unusual when you live in the South. Most people you talk to have a bajillion cousins, and they all live in the same town as you do. You got to be careful who you date. But I didn't have that. I had my two cousins that were couple years older than me, or a few years older than me, and I wasn't really close to them. I was when I was younger. I felt like um, we would have Easter, Easter egg hunts. We would have, Thanksgiving. We'd get together for everyone's birthdays, for Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas. Like, we were always getting together for holidays, and sometimes just random things, would come up and they'd get together for um, to be together. But that all changed when my grandmother died, and she died when I was 12. And I didn't know that that was going to happen. I didn't see it that that's what was happening until it was years later that I realized that that was the catalyst. That was the year that a lot of things changed for me, was when I was 12. But prior to that, living, with my grandparents and my mother there, my mother, she had a full-time job, so she had the means to take care of me. I mean, I never had to worry about um whether or not we had food. I never had to worry about the fact that I was in a clean house. The house was always clean. My grandmother was there. She was always taking care of things. She always made sure that we, had meals. It was, I'm sure it had to do with my grandpa's demands, but it was it was always there. It was just always happening. My family never fought. They never fought. And I, looking back, I think about how weird that was, but like most families, you hear of all these arguments and fighting and bickering and complaining, and that was not my life growing up. Like, they were almost perfect to a fault. Like, I don't know, it was very weird because I felt like the outcast. Believe me, I felt like the outcast because my mother was not married to anyone, and I did not know. It was a big secret of who my father was. My aunt was married to her high school sweetheart or whatever, and they had the perfect little boy and girl family, nuclear family. And my uncle was, married to this beautiful woman, and they had all their things going on. And it just seemed to me that we were the black sheep. We felt like we were the black sheep. My mother disappointing my grandfather by having a child out of wedlock, not even wanting to know who the dad is, not getting him involved. We felt like the black sheep. But not until I was older did I realize that's the feeling that I had. I could put words behind what the feeling that I was having. Now, when I was little, it felt different. It felt a little bit better because I feel like, when my grandmother was there, she was kind of the reason we were all there together. And then when she passed, I don't know if the rest of my family just had some sort of issues with my grandfather. Um, I don't really know because that's a whole nother story that's not related to this one. But um, I don't know. I don't know why they held on to, why my grandmother's passing had to be the catalyst that just kind of tore everyone apart. And that may be something that's common with a lot of families, but it really happened with us. So my grandmother passed away, and then at the same time, that same year, my uncle and my aunt got a divorce. And my aunt they couldn't have kids. My uncle and my aunt could not have children. My mom's brother and his wife. And she was just absolutely amazing to me. She would pick me up. She lived in a big city, and we would go to the big city zoos and go to the big city malls and the big city restaurants, and she took really good care of me. She was great. And so I lost her and my aunt in the same year, or I lost my grandmother and my aunt in the same year, and that was tough. growing up where I did, the little neighborhood that I lived in was a small neighborhood. Um, there's probably 20 houses in this neighborhood. It was the main highway that went through town. It was just this little street that went off to the side, and it had two little streets that kind of went off of it, and all these streets were named after trees. So you had Oak Street, Elm Street, and you had Gum Street. So the road was, it was a nice neighborhood to live in. It was a really nice area part of town, but everyone that lived in that neighborhood was quite a bit older than me. So growing up there at times was very lonely because I was an only child. Didn't really have a whole lot of people to play with in the neighborhood. So I spent a lot of time um, just occupying myself, just trying to keep myself busy playing outside. I spent a lot of time outside in the mud and in the dirt. Um, there were a few kids in the neighborhood that were, that I could play with every now and then, but they were a little bit younger than me, so had to wait for them to grow up a little bit before we could do things around in the woods and stuff. But there was this gully that went to the next of our neighborhood, the side of our neighborhood, and I'll never know why. I don't know why there's not any other ditch in town that is referred to as a gully, but for whatever reason, this ditch is referred to as a gully, and that's just all we've ever called it was the gully. Like my grandfather would say, just you can play out in this area, you can go over here, just don't go over into the gully. And I just would stay away from the gully, but that neighborhood was a fun neighborhood to grow up in because it had some woods attached to it, and I could just go out there and explore the woods. And that was the time when you can just run around and be outside, and nobody, you just had to be back by dark. And I did that a lot. I also spent a lot of time listening to music, and my mother had a record player, and so I was stuck listening to her albums. But at the time, I didn't know any better, but I thought Barry Manilow was the best thing out there as a 7-year-old kid. I listened to a lot of Barry Manilow as a child, and Air Supply, and I mean, it's good songs. Like even to this day, when we started our vinyl collection here at the house, one of the first albums I wanted to get was the Barry Manilow's Greatest Hits Volume 2 because I just remember listening to that a lot. I just would zone out to music growing up. That was my thing that I could just kind of space out because I would find myself daydreaming, and I had to use my imagination a lot because I was an only child, and there's only so much a grandmother can do to keep a kid entertained. But I had to entertain myself a lot, and I would daydream about what my dad might look like quite a bit. I would close my eyes and I would just picture him, as this, of course, to me, super tall, thin man with, I don't know why, but I always pictured him with a mustache because it was the early '80s, but and I was maybe thinking of Tom Selleck, I don't know, but I always pictured him as a tall man with a mustache, and I would just think about, one of these days he's just gonna come here and he's gonna find me. Like, I was like this whole thing about him needing to find me. And I don't know that I didn't know that he knew about me. My mother didn't tell me that until later, but for some reason I just felt like he was looking for me. But anyway, yeah, so growing up there in that house as a kid was um it was different. It was lonely at times, but it wasn't bad. I had a great grandmother, great grandfather. I don't remember a whole lot about my grandmother. I wish I did because she passed away right after I turned 12. So I hate that I don't know a whole lot about her or remember a whole lot about her. But man, my grandfather was a great dude, and everyone liked him. Everyone around here really thought highly of him, and that made me proud. You know, they didn't know about my mother. A lot of times people would forget that they had 3 kids. They had the 3rd kid. They're, "Oh, yeah, I forget they had the 3rd kid. You're that 3rd kid." So my mother never did marry. After we moved out from my grandparents' house, it was just her and I, and it wasn't very long after my grandmother died that my mother lost uh, a large part of her vision. She's vision impaired. She has a condition called histoplasmosis, and it destroyed the retina in both of her eyes. So she has no center vision. She just has like peripheral vision. So she's unable to drive. So when I was in my teen years, I had to kind of grow up pretty quick because, um, it was clear that I was going to have to be the one to get her where she needed to go. She was still working at the same factory when I was in high school. She worked at that same place for 27 years. Um, so she had, when she once she lost her vision, she didn't lose her job, but she was demoted. She couldn't continue to do what she had been doing because it required computers. Computers were becoming a thing at this point, and it required her to be able to see the computers. And at that time, it was the green screens, and she couldn't do it, and so they moved her to a lower paying job, and so that really kind of made it tough for us there for a while. It was We struggled. I went from, you know, the first 10, 12 years of my life really stable to instability. And on top of that, my grandmother passing away, and suddenly my cousins and my aunt and my uncle and none of them want to have anything to do with us, and I didn't understand why, and I still to this day don't really understand why, but it was as if they just abandoned us, and it was just me and my mom at that point. It was just us. It was just us. And my grandfather was a big help. Um, he made sure that I got to school. He made sure that that I had what I needed. But as far as my mother asking him for help for anything else, no, she wouldn't do it. She didn't feel comfortable asking for help. So those 10 years that we lived there, we suffered a little bit. It's when you're a single parent and you're stuck at this one income now forever until, you can figure something else out. I mean, she's legally blind. She can't, there's not a whole lot at that time that she was qualified to do or that was able to do. And, um, they weren't, I know the ADA is a thing now, and you have to give people accommodations, but back then they got away with a lot of different things back then that they couldn't get away with now. If she was doing the same job now, they would have to help her out, but they wouldn't. So anyway, we struggled, and it was a difficult time for us, my teen years. But as I got older, I started wondering more and more and more about who my father was and what was going on with him and why he hasn't found me yet. The internet has kind of become a thing now, and I can remember, like, I don't think I had the internet, but one of my friends did, and I printed off. This was my first time to access a phone book from, a different state. But prior to that, if you wanted to try to look someone's number up, you had to have the actual phone book in front of you from that city. And now all of a sudden we have access to all kinds of stuff. So that was one of the first things I wanted to do was to, now that I have realized I have access to this, I want to find him, I want to reach out to him. So I was probably 17, maybe close to 18, and I enlisted the help of a friend of mine who was very outspoken. She was in a similar situation that I was. She was someone that I met as a teenager, and she never met her father either. So I feel like we bonded that way. And every now and then we would talk about who our parents were, and she talked me into trying to find him. So I looked up the number, looked up as many, I put the name in, and I think there was maybe 5 or 6. I knew what city he was from, so there's like 5 or 6 different ones because it's a fairly common name. And I was like, okay, we just gotta go down the list and start calling, And she was like, yeah, but that's what we gotta do. And I was like, well, I'm not doing it. You're gonna have to do it. She was like, okay, I'll do it. So she started making the phone calls, and it was like, I think first one was, no good number. Second was maybe a no good number. Third one, someone answered, and she was like, hey, uh, my friend is trying to find her father. Do you know a person named blah blah? And he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and hung up. So we gave up after that and decided, well, it's not meant to be, so I'm not going to worry about it. So later on, down the road, probably, I think I was maybe 21 or so at the time. I had 2 of my babies. I was, I guess, just talking to a different friend of mine who um, who was she had a father, but she was also an only child, so we bonded in that way, I guess. But the internet's still a thing, and I said, we need to try to find him now, I think. And she was like, yeah, let's see if we can find him. And I was like, well, you're going to have to talk to him. I'm not doing it. And she was like, I'll do it. I don't care. So I said, okay. So again, we looked up the number on whatever. I think we probably just went to yellowpages.com and typed in the name and the city, and there's, I think, 2 or 3 different numbers, and she called them, and then all of a sudden someone answered, and she's like, my friend is looking for her father. Do you know a person named blah blah? And he said, yeah, I do. And her eyes got real big, and she looked at me, and I knew that that meant he had said something to the affirmative. And she said, okay, well, she's sitting here. Would you like to talk to her? And he said, yeah. So I grabbed the phone and I was like, hello. And he started talking, and he said, well, I don't he probably made some sort of witty comment, but it was, he was very, let's just say, hearing his voice for the first time, I was very shocked because in my head, all these years of imagining what my father sounds like, I did not think about the accent of somebody from Michigan versus someone from where I'm from.
Mm.
It's a lot different. So, I just remember that was my first impression of him was like, oh, wow, he sounds like someone from Michigan? Oh gosh, okay, yeah, of course he would. It was like something I didn't even think about at the time, but that was literally the first thing I thought of was like, oh wow, he he has a different accent than me. Um, but anyway, so we talked. Um, so after hanging up with him, my first thought was, that's my father's voice. I just put a voice with a name that I've heard all of these years. This is crazy. I'm hearing this voice and it's him. And so we agreed at that time that we would talk a little bit later. It wasn't a really good time for him, so he wanted to talk later. So I left my friend's house and went home and told my mother, and she was okay with it. She was fine with it. She was a little nervous, I think. She was a pretty quiet, timid individual anyway. And she was, I think, just a little nervous just because he's people, really, to be honest. But no, so I talked to him on the phone that night again, and he just said, I knew about you. Um, that was the moment that I found out about the letter that had been sent to him. Up until that point, I didn't know. Um, he said, I had a letter that was sent to me by your mother's friend, and I did know about you. Um, but, I'm willing to get to know you, but you can see what kind of effort I've made the last 20 something years. So, if this thing is going to happen, it's going to have to be you to do it. It's going to have to be you to lead that effort. I was, to be honest, a little disappointed. I was expecting him to be a little bit more excited, a little bit more happy. I never even thought in my head that he would be disappointed or that he would be scared or nervous, or I just always thought he was just going to be ecstatic. Here I'm thinking, this guy's, he's looking for me. He's going to be so happy to hear from me. But it didn't turn out that way at the in the beginning. He at the time was married to a lady. He did not have any children, any other children. Um, she did, but they did not have any kids together. After talking to him on the phone, that my second time to search for him, but my first time to actually talk to him, um, I just kind of let it go, and I'd made a decision that you know if he reaches back out to me, I will talk to him. I will if he's going to make at least one little bit of effort first, then I'll go back with him with some more. I didn't, even though he told me I needed to be the one to make this work, I still wanted it to be him. And I tried to give him the chance to do that, and he didn't. So time marches on as it does, and my kids. I got involved with my children's lives. My life was busy. I just didn't think about it for a while, and then Facebook happened, and it was probably around the time that everyone's grandparents were getting Facebook that I was at another friend's house, and she encouraged me to look for him again. She was like, I know you're close to your mother, and your mother is a big part of your life, but you never talk about your dad. What's up with that? And so I told her, the story that I had actually talked to him once, and that was it. And so she encouraged me. She said, "Look, um, excuse me." She said, "You were laid off from your job. You just got laid off. Um, I'm working 12 days on, 12 days off on a time where I'm, off work. Let's go up there. Let's go to Michigan. Let's go find him. I'll knock on the door if I have to." I was like, "Oof, let's not do that. Let's why don't we just try finding him first?" So I searched his name, and the first thing that pops up is his Facebook account, his Facebook. And I was like, and there's a picture, and I'm just staring at it, this little bitty teeny tiny round picture, and I'm thinking, that's is that my dad? Is Am I sitting here looking at this teeny tiny picture of what he actually looks like? Because in my head I've pictured what he looks like. Do I want to click on this and mess up the picture? He's already messed up the voice. Do I want to do I? So I decided, okay, yeah, I'm going to go for this. So I clicked on it. He had one picture. He had looked to me like he had just started his account. Um, I sent him a message and I said, "Hey, if you are who I think you are, then you know who I am." And that was it. That's all I said. And he responded within a couple of hours and said, "I am who you think I am, and I think we need to talk." And I said, "Okay." So I'm now, for the first time, looking at a picture of this person that goes with the name that I've heard my whole life, you know, and that was a crazy feeling. So this time we talked on the phone, and he by now he is divorced, and he's just a single guy, owns his own business, does his own thing, no kids. He lives within 50 steps of his favorite little hangout to go to on the weekends and after work, and he 50 steps it all the way back to his little cabin, and that's his life, is just hanging out with his buddies and going to the VFW and, having a good time and being a cool friend to everyone, and he was actually very open at this point in his life to the idea of starting a relationship with me and getting to know his grandkids and letting me meet his mother and cousins and aunts. So at this point, he was ready. He was ready to start something. So we talked on the phone, you know, several times a month, leading up to our first meeting. He finally talked me into coming up there to meet him. So I said, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what I'm going to do. Um, I went up to Michigan by myself. It was very scary, but he made me feel very comfortable. As soon as I got to the airport and, walked outside, he was there waiting for me. He had actually found a stranger to take a video of us meeting for the first time. So there's a video that exists of that, and he was, you know, he was so happy. And I went back to his town and met all of his friends, and they had a big party for him and a big party for us, and they had even thrown him a quote baby shower. They were buying him, drinks, and they bought him gifts, and they made. I mean, it was incredible. It felt so amazing to walk into this place and just people automatically treated me like I was, you know, one of them. It felt great. It was wonderful. And I met um his mother, and he had two sisters, and I met them. I met cousins. Ironically, I had three cousins on his side, so total, I had five cousins. So I was like, well, I have, really small family, but I met all of them, and that was great. And you know, my father, um, he ended up retiring, a few years after that, and we I should say, actually, are retired, and it's we would just stay in touch. He came down for my wedding to my husband that I'm married to now. We've been together for 13 years, and he was here for that. He loved keeping up with the kids and everything that they were doing. He was very proud of them. He would tell anybody that would listen about our story. Learning about your family history gets you into some sticky situations, because that's where it all started. Was I was trying to find out who his family was. I wanted to know more about his family. He had told me when I was up there that his grandmother had come here from the Netherlands, and after she came, her parents came, and they settled in, somewhere around Michigan. And he told me about all these wonderful breads and desserts that she would make when he was a kid. He could remember, going to her house, and just how a great person she was. And I wanted to learn more about that. I wanted to learn more about her. I wanted to learn more about her family and where we came from. And so I took the ancestry DNA test, and I got my results. And at first, I just paid attention to the um, my ancestry background, and I didn't think it was too odd at the time, but I did notice it did stick out to me that I didn't really have any DNA from that area of Europe. Like I had a lot of Scottish DNA, English DNA, some Welsh, a little bit of Irish, not so much that side. And I thought, well, that's fine. It is what it is. Um, so I just kind of moved on. But then one day I decided to go on there and just start looking at my cousins or my matches, who my matches were. And I noticed that there was this one match up at the top, and at the time it would say second or first cousin. So I just ignored the first part, and I was just like, oh, well, that's clearly a second cousin because I know who my first cousins are. And I ignored it and I just kept going. Like, she was my top one. So I thought everybody below her, you know, down the line, no big deal. And then I think an update came, and it was like, it was getting to the time where I was like starting to pay attention to more of the Cinnamorgan stuff. And what does this Cinnamorgan stuff mean? And I think that's when I realized that she's got a little bit more Cinnamorgans than I feel comfortable with her having. Like something a little loony going on here. I'm not really sure, but I'll figure it out one day. And then I would just move on. I thought my grandmother must have something going on. Like there must be another kid or that no one knew about. And one day I asked my mother, I was like, "Are you sure there's not, like, really think about this?" She's like, no, I don't know. There's nothing else going on over there. She didn't really want to talk about it. Okay. So after, I don't know, a few weeks pass or whatever, and again, I'm just like randomly think about it. A commercial comes on, and we're like, oh, I got that. Let me go look at my thing. Anyway, I pulled up my matches again, and I'm looking at this first match, and I'm thinking, I'm just gonna search that person's name. I'm gonna Facebook that name. So that's what I did. I got my old handy dandy phone out and put into Facebook her name, and pulls up one match. One mutual friend, actually. It says one mutual friend. And I'm thinking, why do I have a mutual friend with this person that lives on the other side of the country? Like, that's weird. You know, they don't live, it's not my father's, it's not ours family because she's not from Michigan. And this person that I have a mutual friend with her is not a part of my father's family, ours family. Uh, but this mutual friend that I do have with her is somebody that I went to school with. It's someone from my hometown. Now that doesn't make any sense because I know who my mother's family is, and they're not this person. They are not him, and he is not. I don't understand. Now this is where I get confused, and this is where I start feeling things are about to change. Something's gone wrong. Something's not right. So I'm at work. I'm about to leave work, and I'm on my phone looking at my matches and thinking about it. You know, I searched her name, found this one mutual friend. This one mutual friend is someone from our town, and she lives on the other side of the country. Something's not making sense. So I called my mother and I said, something's not making sense. Why is this person related to, or why is this person mutual friends with this person? Like, what is this? And she just sat there for a second, didn't say anything. And I was like, are you hearing me? Like, do you know what's happening? What's happening? And she was just like, yeah, I think I know, what's going on here. I think I know what's going on. You just come home and we'll talk about it. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I couldn't wait until I got home. I called her as soon as I got out in the car, and I was like, "What are you talking? What is going on?" And she was just like, "Just get home and we'll talk about it." She just kept saying, "Just get home and we'll talk about it. We will talk about it when you get home. Just get home." And that was the longest drive home. I got home and I thought, "What is she about to tell me?" I don't even want to say it out loud. And I walked in the house and she was crying, and I said, "Are you for real about to tell me that R is not my father? He's not. Is this what's happening?" And she couldn't even speak. She just said, that's what's happened. This person that your match is mutual friends with on Facebook is the nephew of a person that I was with around the same time I was with R." And I said, "So what is are you saying that guy is my dad? That guy is my dad, not R, but this other guy that's from my hometown that's here?" And she's like, "Yeah, that's the only explanation. It's gotta be him. He's gotta be that's the only thing. It doesn't make sense. That's." And I said, "Why did you not ha, why am I just now hearing about this now? Like what?" And she's cried and she was like, "I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Something tells me that he couldn't have kids." She's like, "I don't know. I haven't thought about this in over 40 years. I don't know why I didn't think about him, but something tells me he told me he could not have children. And so I just didn't even consider him to be a possibility because he had been married and he was divorced and he was married for 6 years and they tried to have a kid that whole time and she could not get pregnant. And as soon as they divorced, she had a kid. So he really thought he could not have kids. I thought he could not have kids. And I said, "Okay. I mean, I'm not mad at you. We will get through this. We'll figure this out. I got to figure out what I'm going to do next." So I did what anybody would do. I just Facebook stalked every single person with that name, trying to figure out if he had a Facebook, if he had kids, if he was married, who he was related to, who did I know, why is this person a mutual friend to this person? I'm trying to paint the whole picture here. And so I messaged the mutual friend. I'll call him C. And I said, "Hey, we didn't we went to school together. He was a few years older than me. We had a lot of mutual friends based off of music. Like he played in a band. I knew people, that played in local bands that played in music that did music back in the day. And so we had mutual friends kind of in that same group of people." And so I messaged him and I was like, "Hey, really need to talk to you on the phone. I know this sounds weird. You and I have not talked in 20 something years, but I have a situation that's come up and I really wanted to talk to you about it. I don't really want to just text or message it. I'd prefer to just kind of talk about it. It has to do with your family." And I kind of gave him a little bit of idea of what I was dealing with. And then my husband and I went on our anniversary trip. It was our anniversary, and we had this trip planned to go. We got a cabin at the lake, and so I spent all weekend waiting to hear back from C, this person named C, and because we didn't have really good service, but when I heard from him, he was really interested in talking to me. So we talked on the phone, and I told him the story, and he said, "Okay, here's the deal. Um, the match, the person who is, that comes up on as your top match on Ancestry, she is my half sister. She was adopted when she was born. She is, several years older than me, and my father, um, had his issues, and she was adopted. That's how we're related. And C said, and your father, who I will call B, B is an amazing person. Your father B is just salt of the earth. The exact phrase that he said was, they say that some people, they just, when they pass and they're walking up to the gates of heaven, the gates just open up for them, and they just, there's just a path right there for them because of the life that they've led. He said that is B to a T. That is your dad. He is a great man. Um, he said, I would assume he's going to be excited to hear this whole situation. I would assume he's going to welcome you with open arms, but I'll just tell you a little bit of background about him. He recently retired from his job at a factory that he had had for over 30 plus years, and he lived in town, the same town that I grew up in. Matter of fact, he lived about 3 blocks from where I worked at the time. He was married um, after my mother and him went on their date. He got married and had a child named, I'll just call him B. Um, had B, and B is autistic, and B lives with your father pretty much full time. He is, in his late 30s, and he is a great person. He is a you have got a really really good family, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Could not believe what I was hearing. This family here in this town this whole time. And he's like, "Oh yeah, and by the way, it's big. You've got a big family." I was like, "Oh, okay." He was like, "Your dad was the youngest of 8. There are a bunch of cousins, there are a bunch of aunts, there are a bunch of uncles." He said, "There's a bunch of us." He said, "You also have a sister." He said, "When your dad married B's mom, she had a child, and that child is a couple years older than you, but you have a sister too, and your dad adopted her when she was little. Um, so you've got a sister and a brother." And I was an only child, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was it was wonderful. It was great news. I had a really really good outcome for that because I it could have gone a million different ways. But he said, I'll forward this information to your sister, and I'll let her reach out to you and then let you guys go from there." And I was like, "That's great." So she messaged me immediately, very excited, so excited. In fact, she wanted to tell our father in person, and she couldn't wait. She lived in another part of the United States, and she booked a flight that next day and flew over here because she was so excited and so ready to tell him. And what they decided is that they would, to make sure that my brother was okay with me, they invited me over to meet him for the first time as just a friend of my sister's, just to see, make sure that he liked me and make sure that we're okay. Because he's pretty picky with who all he likes. He loves his family, but he's a great guy. Anyway, so she was so excited. She was ready to tell our father about it, and she booked her flight, and she said, "I'll call you when it's all over, and let you know how it goes." And she told him, and he was so happy. He was so excited and ready to meet because neither my sister nor my brother, neither one of them have children. And So not only is he getting another daughter, he's getting three grandchildren. And he didn't think he would ever have grandchildren. So he was very excited about the whole situation. And my sister and I, when she came to town, we were able to hang out for a while, and I got to learn a little bit more about her family and her mother and how that whole situation came about. And she said, I just need to know, why do you think, did your mom say why she didn't reach out to him, or did she say why she didn't think he was your father? And I said, yeah, she was under the impression for some reason that he couldn't have kids. And she said, her eyes got real big, and she said, for years thought that he could not have children because when he was young, he was in an accident, and he was told, his mother was told, as my father was a young child, that my father would never be able to have children. And so after being married to the lady that he was married to for several years, trying to have kids, them getting a divorce, and her, able to have children after their divorce. So when he had B, it was a big surprise because he was under the impression he was not able to have children. So that corroborated my mother's story. When she was saying, for some reason in the back of her mind, she was thinking he had told her he couldn't have kids, and he probably did. He probably did tell her that. That was probably part of their conversation that they had on their date. But regardless, he was really excited and really happy. Now, back before I moved out of my grandparents' house, we lived in this little neighborhood, and it had all these streets that were named after trees, right? Um, I lived on Oak Street. What I found out later on is that my paternal grandmother also lived in that neighborhood. She lived on Gum Street. As a child, I was in the same neighborhood as my brother B was on occasion because they spent a lot of time at that grandmother's house. There was even an occasion where my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, babysat me, not knowing that I was actually her grandchild. It was a time where my mother, I guess, was at work and my grandparents had to have a sitter, and she watched me for a while. And there was also a time where she was watching me and my father walked in, and I was there as a like a 3-year old, and he saw me and he knew that I was, he knew who my mother was, but never put two and two together. There was a lot of missed opportunities there. I feel like early on that, if people would just kind of, thought about it just a little bit longer and a little bit harder, they might have been able to figure some things out. After being my father, um, we met. He met my kids. Um, I started talking to him about who all he was related to, like who his nephews and nieces were, because a lot of his nieces and nephews are actually his age because he is the youngest of 8 kids, and they were spread out over time. So um, a lot of the people in the family that are my age are actually like my first cousin once removed. They're my cousin's cousin. Most of my first cousins are older than me because I'm one of the youngest. But I did learn that I graduated with one of my cousins. I was really good friends. Like, I had just went to a concert 2 weeks prior to finding out all of this information with one of my cousins. My kids were involved in marching band, and some of the other marching band parents were my cousins. My kids went to school with some of their cousins that we just found out they were actually cousins, and they were already friends to begin with. it was just really, really wonderful. And then I found out that they have an annual family reunion because they really are a very close family. Like they used to go camping a lot together, and they used to spend a lot of time together. As their families spent a lot of time with each other, and they still do their best to get together once a year. But everyone's moved off, so it makes it a lot of people have moved off, so it makes it a little bit difficult. But a lot of people, after the year after I was discovered, I feel like the family reunions have got a little bit of a ramp up. People that you didn't used to go were starting to kind of go again, and um, made me feel really good because it's a great family. Another thing that just amazes me about them is um, back in the day they used to do the music for the local like little dance hall here in town. Like that, the whole family was involved in playing the music for the local dance on Friday night that you would go to, as a older person, I guess. It was mostly older people there, but they took care of all the tunes there. But my brother B, he and I talk. Uh, Actually, I just talked to him just before this. We talk at least once or twice a week. He calls me, and he's got his little list of people that he talks to, cousins and stuff, and aunts and things like that that he keeps in touch with. We talk about. Today he was telling me about an episode that he just watched of Andy Griffith. He likes watching the Andy Griffith show, and he likes some different little hee haw sketches, and he really likes. He's very nostalgic. He loves to talk about the family, and he loves to talk about um, grandma's house. Him and my dad still drive by our grandparents' house just about once a week because he likes to see their houses. Um, we talk about all the different, like the bowl where the bowling alley was, and our neighboring town, and we talk about what used to be in this building. Do you remember when this was this, and do you remember when that was that? And we talk all because we've both lived here our whole lives, so we talk. Do you remember when Warehouse Foods was over here in this building? And that's the one thing that he just loves to talk about is um, what places used to be here in town and in our neighboring towns and stuff. But and he loves his shows. He loves to watch Falcon's Crest, and he likes some of those old soap opera type stuff like Dynasty. But he also likes Sylvester is his favorite cartoon character, and he is the light of my life. Like he is just oh, he's just an amazing person, and I just love every minute I'm around him. I try to be over there as much as I can. Um, like I said, we talk on the phone quite a bit. I missed out on so much with him, and sometimes it's when my sister's in town. She lives off, so she's not over a whole lot. But when she's in town, and I sit there and I listen to them talk, and they have their bond, and it makes me a little sad sometimes because I didn't get to have that with him. But I'm really trying hard to start that now, to get that going now, because I have a grandchild coming up, and one of my sons is having a baby in March, and she's going to know her Uncle B, as her Uncle B. She won't know that it took us 40 something years to find each other. It's going to be her Uncle B, and my dad is going to be her great grandpa. Like I can't wait for the next generation to come up and for them to learn about us, and us to learn more about them and their family, and just do as much as we can with each other, because learning from getting to know a completely different family, uh, the best way that I found with R was to just just spend as much time together as you can. Do the things, go out to eat, go, visit each other as much as you can, talk to each other on the phone, just try to make it happen because those memories will come from it. Just the memories will come as the more you're around each other, and you're creating new memories, and it's okay that it's late. Just do it. Like, the thing is to just, you know, if you're waiting for that perfect moment to spring something on somebody, you're never going to find it. You got to make it happen. But when I found all this out, the second half of this is, what do I do with R? How do I tell R that do I tell him? What do I, of course I tell him, but how am I going to do this? So I took a couple of weeks to just kind of think about it and um, try to figure out what I wanted to do. And at the time, he wasn't living in Michigan anymore. He had moved to a southern state. So I had made some friends down there, visiting him. And I reached out to one of them and I was like, "Hey, I'd really like to talk to you about something and get your opinion on what I need to do." And she was amazing. She was great. She said, you know, I said, "I want to fly down there." I said, "I want to tell him in person. I don't want to do it over the phone. I don't want to do it over, voicemail, text. I want to tell him in person. I owe him that." And so I booked a flight down there, and she said, "You can stay with us, and we'll figure this out." So I flew down there, and that night I texted him. I surprised him basically. It was like, "Hey, I'm surprised I'm in town. Will you meet me at your favorite place?" And he was like, "Yeah." So he came over and we talked, and then we went over to my friend's house, and she was like, "You do this here. Like, get him away from his place and his girlfriend situation, and you have him here, and you tell him by himself." And I was like, "Okay." So because by now he is back with his ex-wife, the one that he was with the second time that we tried to reach out. He is back with her, and they're living together now. And we were worried about how she was going to react. I was more worried about how she was going to react than I was him. I had already felt this tension building, anytime that I would come to visit him, because I felt like there was some jealousy there or something. I don't know what it was, but there was something going on there that she liked me, but I think she was a little bit jealous of the attention that I got from him. And so I was a little nervous about how I was more nervous about her than I was him. But I told him, I said, "I'm so sorry. I wish that it was different. I wish that there was something else I could do, but you were owed the truth. I would never lie to you about any of this. You know, here's the reasons why mom did what she did. Here's the reasons why he did what he did. This is, I laid it all out for him, and he was okay. He was visibly a little bit upset, but he was okay. And I said, "I hope that you still feel the same way about me, because in my head, my father has always been that R from Michigan. In my head, growing up, it was always R from Michigan, R from Michigan. And now that that R from Michigan has a name and a person, and we've spent time together, and I've met his family, and he's met mine, and we've invested 10 years, trying to, get to know each other, repair what is from pops up from the past, and try to just move forward. And, it's hard. I knew that he would be devastated because he was very proud of us. He loved to tell the story about how we got back together, basically, how we became a family. And that this just crushed all of that. it crushed his identity and his, you know, I I hated it. I hated every minute of it, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I knew I needed to do that. So that was tough. We occasionally talk now. If he sees that there's a tornado coming through the area, he'll kind of message me. If I see that there's a hurricane coming towards him, I'll message him. But that's pretty much it. But
And you've had to go through this twice.
yeah, and what's weird is that it it was easy. I don't want to say. I guess I could just say I wasn't as uncomfortable as I was meeting all the new people that I met the second time. Like the first time, it just felt so uncomfortable, and it felt so awkward. But after going through that, and then, oh, okay, that's not your cousins. These are your cousins. I don't know why, but I just embraced it a little bit more because I've already been through all of that before. I know what these feelings are. I can put words to what these feelings are. A little different. It was, and I joke about that. I've joked about that with him too. I was like, oh, I'm a pro with this. Relax. I've done this before. This is how this goes. Like, but I will say this though, going back to living in a small town, I worried about, when you're growing up and you live in a small town, everyone's related to everybody in a small town. And especially if your grandparents are from the city you're living in, you got to be careful with who you go out with and who you date.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times people will say, okay, now you need to come home and tell me who these boys are you've been talking to because I need to tell you if you're related to them or not. I never had to deal with any of that because I thought half my family was in Michigan, the other half was in another town. So the first thing we wanted to know was, okay, are my husband and I related?
Yeah.
And yeah, because my husband also comes from an equally large family. We're bound to be related, but it turns out that by blood we are not related, but by marriage we are related twice. We do have one mutual first cousin once removed, and we have uh, I think my first cousin's husband is my husband's stepdad's cousin.
Okay.
See if you can follow that one. But yeah, no, we joke about it now, but yeah, it's great. No, I can't believe that everything's happened the way that it's happened, and it's unbelievable, but I'm making the best of it. And my brother, I can't get over just how absolutely amazing he is, and to know that I have one is just it's crazy. Oh, and another thing that we talk about is the gully, because I mentioned to him, I was like, did you ever go play in the gully? He's like, no, I was never allowed to play in the gully. I said, I wasn't allowed to play in the gully either. And we both knew what we were talking about because we come from the same neighborhood. We knew what the gully was. But yeah, it's been great.
I love that relationship with your brother and with all your family. I'm really happy for you, Melissa. I just am just listening to you. I don't know if this is called a double NPE or what this is, but it really does sound so beautiful, especially as an only child, someone that grew up with a family. Now you just have all this family and this new relationship with your brother. It's really beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing today.
Well, thank you, Lily.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.